Welcome to the Human Sexuality class. Now you might think taking a human sex class that it's going to be all about champagne and candles and romance, but I hate to break it to you, but it's not going to be much about candles and champagne and romance. It's going to be more about research. So I want to briefly go over the main ways that psychiatrists, psychologists, medical doctors, or what we call sexologists actually do sex research. There's actually a few different ways, and the book gives you a whole lot more, but I want to kind of go over a few of them. The first one is called the case study. And this is the one that Kinsey made really famous, where Kinsey would go out and he would interview people and he would get to know everything there was to know about the person. He'd ask them their background, how old they were, how many partners they've had, and all kinds of very detailed questions. That's called the case study. Another way is called the laboratory study, and Masters and Johnson are famous for that. Now the laboratory study is very different than the case study. The case study, you're just going to sit down with someone, sit on a couch and ask them some questions. But in a laboratory study, you bring them into a lab and actually put all sorts of technology on them so that we can get your heart rate and actually observe the person doing various sexual behaviors. Now obviously it takes a very special person who would sign up for a laboratory study. But the good thing about a laboratory study is a person can't lie. Where in a case study, they may actually lie to the person that they're being asked the questions by. Another method that you might actually have heard about is called naturalistic observation. And with naturalistic observation, the researcher goes out into the field and tries to observe people as they're just doing various behaviors. So if you wanted to observe dating, you may actually go out into a bar and sit around and watch people and see how they might try to date. And this has actually been done by a variety of psychologists. And here's just one little interesting tip that they found with naturalistic observation. When women typically go out to a bar or a club, they tend to go in a group, and psychologists call this a herd, that the women will actually go out in a group of maybe 3 or 4. And these women tend to stay together the whole night. Where when men go to a bar, they tend to be more likely to go as a group of 1 or 2. And once a man gets into a bar, he may actually leave as he goes out and looks for the woman. So that would be something that you didn't have to ask them, you didn't have to bring them to a lab, you just go out and observe in the natural environment. Another way that psychologists study research is by giving out surveys. And a lot of psychologists hand out surveys about everything. And one of the things that they have found with surveys is they'll ask questions about marriage and communication. And then what's fascinating is you could use those survey results to see who's more likely to stay together and who's more likely to get a divorce perhaps in the future. And a final way that sex researchers or sexologists do research is through the experiment. And with an experiment, as the name would imply, there's something that the researcher actually manipulates or changes, and they want to see if there's any influence at the end, and that's called the dependent variable. When I was in graduate school, my research was actually on some human sexuality, so I want to share this as a great example of an experiment. With this experiment, I brought men into a lab, and they were to watch one of 3 movies. One movie was a really boring movie. One movie was a really exciting adventure movie where this couple was underwater and they were seeing aliens. And then the third movie was actually a very sexual movie. And what I did then is had the men watch these 3 movies, one of the 3 movies, and then they had to answer questionnaires about their decision making. And not surprisingly, the people who watched the more sexual movie actually made worse decisions. And I called that research in the heat of the moment. The independent variable was the movie, and the dependent variable was the decisions that people made later. And people make worse decisions after they're sexually aroused. Well, it's not quite champagne, it's not candles, but I hope you find the research pretty interesting. Welcome to the class.